Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind howled low across the open land, dragging dust across the broken trail where the woman walked, her two children clutching her skirt with tired hands. Penelope Kade had been on the move for 3 days. Her boots were cracked, her dress torn near the hem, and her throat dry as flint. But she did not stop. Not when her son, Benjamin, 6, whimpered from the cold, nor when her daughter, Bethany, 4, stumbled and scraped her knee. She just kept walking. She had no choice. She had left Montana with nothing but a satchel, 2 blankets, and the small locket her mother gave her before she died. The man she'd once trusted, her husband, had vanished 2 months ago, leaving her with debts to ranchers, a sick horse, and no work to speak of. When the banker said he was taking the house, she did not argue. She packed up the children and left. But this was not survival. This was losing ground. She was about to drop to her knees when she heard hooves. A single rider. She turned, pulling her children behind her. The man slowed his horse, holding up both hands. "Easy now," he said, voice calm low. "I ain't here to hurt anybody." He was tall, sun-darkened, with a strong jaw under a week's worth of stubble. His eyes, the color of worn wood, locked on hers. "Name's Zeke Holleran," he said. "You look like you could use a hand." Penelope narrowed her eyes. "We do not need help from strangers." Zeke dismounted and stepped back from his horse. "Not asking you to trust me. Just offering water for the little ones. That boy's about to fall over." Benjamin swayed where he stood. Penelope hesitated, then gave a slight nod. Zeke pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and crouched before Benjamin, holding it out. "Here, son. Small sips now." Benjamin looked to his mother, then took it. Bethany reached for it next, and Zeke smiled, gentle. "There you go, sweetheart." Penelope watched the way he moved. Careful, quiet, like he had been around children before. "You live nearby?" she asked. "About 2 miles west. Got a small spread. Just me and a dog that thinks he runs the place." She crossed her arms. "Why offer help?" Zeke stood, meeting her eyes. "Because it is the right thing to do." She looked away. "You got a plan?" he asked. "Find work. Somewhere. Anything. Just need to get to Casper." "That is over 70 miles, and you do not have a wagon." "I know what I have and do not have." Zeke nodded slowly. "Well, I can let you rest at my place. Just a night. Food, water, warm fire. I will ride you into town tomorrow." "Nos trins punto." Penelope hesitated, but Benjamin was pale and Bethany was shivering. She nodded once. Zeke helped lift the children onto his horse and handed Penelope the reins. He walked beside them the whole way. His cabin sat near a low ridge, smoke curling from the chimney. A dog barked once, then ran up to greet them, tail wagging. Inside, it was small but clean. A table, 2 chairs, a stove that threw heat into the room. Zeke laid blankets by the fire, handed Penelope a tin bowl of stew. The smell made her eyes burn. "You can eat first," she said, pushing it toward the children. "I made plenty," Zeke said, setting down 2 more bowls. They ate in silence. When the children drifted to sleep on the floor, Zeke stepped outside to give her space. Penelope followed, arms folded tight. "Why are you alone out here?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Used to ride with a cattle drive outfit. Left it last year. Lost someone. Thought maybe I could find quiet out here." She nodded. "I lost someone too." He looked at her. "Your husband?" She hesitated. "He left. Took anything worth selling. Left me to face the debts." Zeke's jaw tightened. "You deserve better than that." Penelope turned toward the night sky. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to want forever," Zeke said, voice low but sure. She looked at him sharply. "You do not say something like that to a woman you just met." "I do not say things I do not mean," he answered. There was no charm in his voice, just truth. Penelope looked away, heart beating too fast. I do not have forever to give. I am not asking for it now, he said. Just a chance. Inside, Benjamin stirred in his sleep. She turned and went to him. That night, Penelope lay curled around her children, but her eyes stayed on the man who had offered her nothing but kindness in a world that had given her none. In the morning, she packed what little she had.
Thank you, she said.
We will head east. Zeke stood near the barn, arms crossed. You do not have to. I cannot stay here. Why not? Because you said forever, and I do not know if I can even give tomorrow. Zeke stepped forward. Then stay for today. Penelope stood still. Benjamin tugged her sleeve. Mama, can we stay? Please? She looked down at him, then toward Zeke. He looked steady, not just kind, but safe. She took a breath, then nodded. Zeke smiled, and it was the first time in weeks she felt something warm in her chest. They stayed. One day turned to two, then a week. Zeke built a small wooden cot for Benjamin and Bethany. He showed them how to feed the chickens. Penelope mended Zeke's shirts and taught him how to braid Bethany's hair. They shared meals, long silences, and stories by firelight. Zeke never pushed, never asked for more than she could give. But she found herself watching him. The way he leaned down to listen when Benjamin spoke. The way he always waited for her to speak first. The way he looked at her like she was not broken, just tired. One night, as snow fell light outside, Penelope stood near the fire, hands wrapped around a tin mug. Zeke stepped close. I meant what I said, he said. I know enough. I have seen the way you keep going, the way you love those kids. That is what matters. She looked up at him. I am scared. Me too, he said. But I am here. If you will have me. Penelope reached up and touched his face. And for the first time in years, she let someone hold her. The wind had shifted by late February, rising warmer from the south, carrying with it the smell of thawing earth and something faintly green beneath the snow. The days had grown longer, the sun casting a softer light through the cottonwoods beside the creek behind Zeke's cabin. Penelope stood at the fence line, sleeves rolled to her elbows, mending a break in the wire where the last snowstorm had bowed it low. She worked in silence, one hand holding the line steady while the other twisted the wire taut. Her fingers had grown steadier these past weeks, not from ease, but from use. From the barn came the sound of Benjamin's small boots scuffing the packed dirt. Zeke's voice followed, low and patient. If the saddle slips, what's the first thing you do? Benjamin answered too fast. Jump off. Zeke waited a beat. Try again. Penelope smiled faintly and returned to the wire. Bethany sat nearby in the grass, knees tucked beneath her, drawing in the dirt with a stick. She hummed under her breath, tuneless but content. Later that evening, Penelope wiped her hands clean on her apron and stepped inside the cabin, the smell of roasting rabbit thick in the air. Zeke had taken to cooking most nights, claiming he didn't trust her to let meat rest without fussing over it. You're burning the carrots, she said, setting a bucket of water near the hearth. Zeke poked the pan with the edge of his knife. They're not burned. They're stubborn. She leaned a shoulder against the doorframe. That what you tell yourself when things get tough? He glanced up at her. Only when they're worth the trouble. She didn't look away. You always like quiet women who show up with nothing but a satchel and sorrow? He wiped his hands on a cloth and turned to face her.
No.
I've never liked anyone like you. She raised an eyebrow. I mean that, he said, voice steady. I've known women who smiled easy, said sweet things. But when you speak, it's got weight behind it. You don't waste breath. You don't pretend. She crossed her arms. So you're drawn to sharp tongues and worn-out boots. Zeke stepped closer, slowly, like he was approaching a skittish horse. I'm drawn to the way you still stand up straight when the world's tried to break you down. She held his gaze, but her fingers curled into the fabric of her apron. I keep telling myself not to expect anything, she said. That this is just shelter. Just a pause. He nodded.
You can keep telling yourself that.
Doesn't change what's true. And what's that? That you're not just passing through anymore. The silence between them stretched thin, then settled. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat on the porch with her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Zeke joined her without speaking, offering her a mug of warm cider. She took it. I used to think I could wait life out, she said after a while. If I stayed quiet, maybe it would pass me by without taking more. Zeke turned his head toward her. But it keeps coming, doesn't it? She continued. Takes things whether you're ready or not.
He didn't argue.
Just sat there listening. I don't know how to want something again, she said. You don't have to want everything, he said. Just one thing. One small thing. That's how it starts. She looked at him in the half-dark. And what's your one thing? He turned his hands palm up in his lap. You. Penelope didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Spring came slowly. The land softened. The snows melted into rivulets that fed the creek. Zeke added a second shelf to the pantry. Penelope hemmed Bethany's dress to fit the length her limbs had stretched into. One morning, Benjamin stood beside the garden plot, squinting down at the furrows. Will the seeds work? He asked. Zeke knelt beside him. Only if we keep tending them. Penelope watched from the porch. Her hands were idle, her heart not. Inside her, something fragile had stopped retreating. That evening, she found Zeke behind the barn, checking a loose board. She stepped close, quiet. I want to stay, she said. He turned, blinking once like he hadn't expected her to come just then. I don't want to wait anymore, she said, voice low. Not for the next bad thing. Not for permission. Zeke reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then don't. She leaned into his hand, and for the first time, she let herself believe that something good could last. The wind carried a scent of damp pine and fresh-turned soil as Penelope stepped barefoot into the garden, the hem of her skirt brushing dirt still cool from last night's rain. Morning light cut through the mist rising off the fields, and in the hush between the waking birds and the creak of the cabin door, she felt something settle in her chest, a quiet, almost unfamiliar peace. Bethany crouched near the sprouting peas, her small hands careful as she plucked away weeds. Benjamin was off with Zeke near the ridge, checking the trap line for rabbits. It had become their ritual those early hours, just the two of them walking the edge of the land Zeke had worked alone for so long. Penelope knelt beside her daughter and nudged a clump of clover aside with the back of her hand. Careful not to pull the shoots. Bethany nodded, curls falling across her brow. I know. Zeke says they're still learning how to stand up. Penelope blinked, her fingers pausing above the soil. He said that. MHM, Bethany murmured, eyes intent on her task. By the time the sun climbed higher, Zeke and Benjamin returned with 2 rabbits and a small bundle of mushrooms. Zeke's shirt was damp from the waist up, and a dark smear of mud streaked the side of his neck where he'd ducked under a fallen limb. Penelope opened the door as they approached. Didn't know hunting meant wrestling the forest. Zeke gave a low breath that might have been a laugh. Got tangled in a laurel thicket. Your boys got quicker feet than me. Benjamin grinned, proud and flushed. She took the rabbits from him, brushing his damp hair back before he darted off to show Bethany his find. Zeke lingered at the steps. You ever think about adding to the coop? Penelope looked up from the bundle. You mean more hens? Maybe a rooster. Could get chicks come summer. Wouldn't have to trade as often. She nodded slowly. I'll ask around next time I'm in Douglas. Zeke stepped back, boots crunching soft in the gravel. I could ride in with you. Help carry feed. Or just stand by while you glare down half the merchant stalls. Penelope leaned against the doorframe, one brow lifting. I don't glare. You make a man forget how to breathe, that's all I meant. She flushed and turned toward the kitchen, but her mouth curved as she walked. That evening, the children asleep beneath the patched quilt Zeke's mother had once sewn, Penelope sat beside the fire with a wooden spoon in her hand, carving a handle smooth. Zeke was across from her, sharpening the edge on a rusted axe head he'd found buried behind the shed. The fire cracked once, throwing sparks toward the hearth. "I was 16 the first time I tried to leave home," Penelope said, not looking at him. "Made it to the edge of a creek 2 miles out before my father caught up." Zeke set the axe down slow. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me, handed me a biscuit he'd wrapped in a cloth. We ate in silence. Then he walked me back. "What made you go?" Zeke asked. She paused in her carving. "My mother had died the month before. I didn't know how to exist in that house without her. Thought maybe if I left, I could remember her better." Zeke leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Did you?" "No," she looked up. "But I remembered who I was when I came back." Zeke nodded, gaze steady. She set the spoon down. "You never talk about your family." "Not much to tell," he said. "My pa drank himself into the ground before I turned 20. Ma died a year later. Just got tired, I think." Penelope tilted her head. "You ever think about leaving this land?" "I tried," he said. "Took work in Kansas for a spell. Drove cattle down through Texas. But nothing held. I kept thinking about the ridge out back and the way the snow settles on the barn roof. Came back and built the place up again." She was quiet, watching the way his hands rested, fingers still calloused but loose now, no longer clenched tight with strain. "I think I could stay," she said. Zeke looked at her, breath caught between one word and the next. "I mean longer than a season." Her voice didn't waver. "Not just for shelter. Not just for the children." He rose then, slow as dusk rising over the plains, and crossed to her. She stood to meet him. "I won't ever ask you for more than you can give," he said. She reached up, fingers resting against his collar, where the fabric had gone soft with wear. "You don't have to ask." His hands settled gently at her waist, not pulling, just present. They stood like that, no rush, no need to fill the quiet until the fire burned low and the wind outside began to hum through the eaves. Later, when the stars had spilled across the sky and the cabin had gone still, Penelope lay beside him in the bed he'd once slept in alone. Their hands were laced between them, fingers tangled not out of need, but choice. And for the first time in her life, the future didn't feel like a cliff's edge or an empty road. It felt like home. A pale fog lingered low that morning, curling between fence posts and the base of the cottonwoods like breath not yet drawn in. Penelope stepped out with a basket hooked over her arm and a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The hens were already rustling in the coop, feathers fluffed against the chill. She scattered feed, then paused, watching the sky shift from dull slate to honeyed gray. Zeke came around the corner of the barn leading his horse, one hand resting casual at the reins. "You planning to ride out?" she asked, brushing feed dust from her palms. "Just to the south pasture," he said. "Fence there's leaning worse than I remembered." He glanced toward the cabin where the children's voices carried faintly through the shutters. "They doing lessons today?" She nodded. "Benjamin's reading through a book I found in the cellar. Bethany's trying to draw the letters more than write them." He gave a thoughtful hum. "You ever think of teaching other children?" Her brow lifted. "You suggesting I open a schoolhouse out here?" "Maybe not a schoolhouse. But folks pass through. Families settle, even if just for a season. There's not much in the way of learning between here and Douglas." She rested her hip against the coop gate. "I had enough trouble convincing Benjamin to hold a pencil. Couldn't imagine doing that with a stranger's child." Zeke's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You've got more patience than you let on." "I've got more stubbornness than patience," she said, and turned back toward the house. By midday, the sun had burned through the fog. Penelope laid Bethany down for a nap and sent Benjamin out with a jar to gather wild onions near the creek. She stepped out with a pail toward the well, but paused when she saw Zeke seated on the porch, boot in his lap, threading new laces through the eyelets. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked, settling beside him on the stoop. "The trail. That kind of life." He looked up, surprised by the question. "Some parts, maybe. The wide sky. The way you could ride for days and not see another soul. But," he tugged the lace through, slow and even, "wasn't much to come back to. A man gets tired of sleeping on the ground with nothing but a rope around his saddle and a rifle for company." She looked down at her hands, thumbs brushing against one another. "You ever think about what comes next?" "I think about tomorrow," he said. "Anything past that's a kindness." She hesitated. "If we planted fruit trees near the slope, would they take? You thinking apples or plums?" "I was thinking both." Zeke leaned back against the porch post. "So, you're planning for more than tomorrow?" She didn't answer, but her hand settled against the grain of the railing, fingers tracing a knot in the wood. That evening, a wagon creaked up the ridge road, drawn by a sway-backed mare and driven by an older man with a wide-brimmed hat and a limp that kept time with the jolting wheels. Penelope stepped out from the cabin while Zeke met the man at the fence. "Name's Arlen," the man offered. "Heard from a trader in Douglas you might have rabbit hides to sell." Zeke nodded. "Got a few. Come on down, and I'll show you." Arlen glanced toward Penelope, then back to Zeke. "She your missus?" Zeke didn't hesitate. "She's home." Penelope felt her breath catch, not from surprise, but from how easily the words fit. She joined them as Zeke brought out the bundle of hides. Arlen inspected them, nodding approval. "You've got a good setup here," he said. "Most folks out this way still living in tents or half-dug sod houses." Zeke shrugged. "Built it slow." Arlen's gaze flicked to Penelope. "Takes a steady hand to keep it going." Penelope only offered a quiet, "We manage." After Arlen rode off, Zeke lingered near the barn. Penelope walked up beside him and leaned against the post where he stood. "You meant it?" she asked. "What part?" "Calling me home." He looked at her, face unreadable in the gathering dusk. "I've never had to name it before. But yes, I meant it." She reached for his hand, fitting her fingers between his without ceremony or hesitation. "I think I could plant plum trees," she said. He squeezed her hand once. "Then that's what we'll do." And just like that, the world felt bigger, not because it stretched wide, but because it was finally full. By late April, the ridge behind the cabin burst into color. Wild lupin and prairie smoke rose between the rocks, and the cottonwoods wore a soft green veil. Penelope stood near the slope with a spade in one hand, a sapling cradled in the crook of her arm. The ground had softened just enough to take planting, and Zeke had already dug 2 holes along the fence line, each one waiting like an open promise. She knelt, setting the roots gently into the earth. Zeke stepped beside her, wiping his hands on his trousers. "That's the last of them. We'll see how they hold," she said, brushing soil from her fingers. "If they take, maybe next spring we try cherries." He crouched beside her, arms resting over his knees. "You always make plans in twos?" "I don't trust one of anything," she said, standing slowly. "One horse goes lame, one roof beam rots. I like the idea of a spare." Zeke nodded but didn't answer. When he rose, he reached back for the canteen tied to his belt and handed it over. She took it without a word and drank. On the walk back, Benjamin came running from the creek's edge with something clutched in his hand. "Ma, look what I found." Zeke stepped aside as the boy barreled past, nearly tripping over his own boots. Penelope held out her palm. "Let's see." Benjamin dropped a smooth gray arrowhead into her hand, the edges still sharp. It was stuck in the mud, just below the elm tree. Zeke leaned down to look. Could be Shoshone. Maybe older. Benjamin's eyes widened. Can I keep it? Penelope turned it over once, then nodded. If you treat it with care. Zeke watched the boy run off again, then looked toward her. You always know how to say the right thing to him.
I don't always know, she said.
I just try not to say the wrong thing. That night, after the children were asleep and the oil lamp turned low, Penelope sat at the table mending a tear in her shawl. The thread slipped easily through the needle, her hands steady. Zeke came in from the porch and moved to the wash basin, rolling up his sleeves. There's a couple from Dakota heading this way. They're looking to settle north of the creek. Arlen passed word. Penelope tied off the thread and set the shawl aside. How close? 3 miles, maybe. Said they've got 2 boys and a young girl. She leaned back, considering. It'd be good to have neighbors again. Zeke dried his hands, then crossed the room. You ever miss the noise? Towns, people, the rest of it. She shook her head. I like knowing who I'm cooking for. He pulled a chair beside hers and sat her down. I've been thinking on something. She turned toward him, waiting. I talked to the circuit preacher in Douglas. He's riding through next week. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak. I asked if he'd stop here, Zeke said. Said he would. If you'd want that. Penelope's hands folded in her lap. You mean to marry me? He nodded once, no hesitation in his eyes. I do. She studied him for a long moment. You know what you're asking? I'm asking to keep building this life with you. With the children. With whatever comes next. Her voice was barely a whisper. I never thought I'd have that again. You do, he said. Right here. She reached for him and laced her fingers through his. Then yes. The preacher came 6 days later, just after supper. He wore a weathered coat and carried a Bible wrapped in oilcloth, and he smiled when he saw the children gathered by the porch steps in their best clothes. They stood in the middle of the field, between the plum saplings and the chicken coop, with the sun painting the far hills gold. The vows were simple. Zeke's voice didn't waver. Penelope's did, just once, when she said his name. After, they shared bread and sweetened apples cooked down over the fire. Bethany fell asleep on Zeke's lap halfway through the evening, and Benjamin leaned against Penelope's side, warm and drowsy. When the stars came out, the preacher tipped his hat and rode on. They watched him disappear down the ridge road until only the sound of hoofbeats remained. Zeke turned to her. You sure? She smiled, the answer already in her eyes. That night, in the quiet of their shared room, Penelope lay beside him, his hand resting gently at her waist. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder, breathed in the scent of wood smoke and worn linen. I feel like I've finally come home, she whispered. You are home, he said, barely louder than a breath. And I'm right here.
And he always would be.
Years passed, but the rhythm of that life never slipped away. The plum trees took root and bore fruit by the 3rd summer. Penelope taught reading to 6 children from nearby homesteads, keeping a slate on the wall and a tin box of worn pencils on the windowsill. Zeke built a second room onto the cabin, and when the roof needed mending, Benjamin helped without being asked. Bethany grew tall and strong, always with a flower tucked behind one ear. She followed Zeke through the fields, asking questions he never minded answering. The arrowhead stayed on the mantel, next to a jar of dried sage and a folded note Benjamin had written the first time he spelled his name without help. There were hard seasons, still dry years, sickness, fences blown down by prairie wind. But they met each one together. Every night, Penelope and Zeke sat by the fire, hands joined, hearts steady. And in all the years that followed, through every spring thaw and harvest moon, they never once let go.